Hey, Dr. C with you. Let's talk about some of the big causes of adrenal fatigue and how you can go about defeating it. So, first off, what is this thing? Well, your body has this system of regulating its main actions. We call this the autonomic nervous system. And there's two gears in that, so to speak. There's the fight or flight response and what's been called the feed and breed, or tend and defend, or mend and repair. But basically, you've got a mode of activating your body and getting through tough things, and a mode of fixing it all up afterward. And we want a good balance between those. So all this stuff about adrenal fatigue is about that not working right. And it's a real problem. So we know this is there, and we suspect that being a big cause for those that have fatigue, poor sleep, issues with their circadian rhythm, meaning that certain times of day are much worse than others. Also, this is relevant for those that have abnormal blood pressure, quite high or quite low. And we also think about it when someone has strong cravings for salty things or sugary things. So what gives rise to this? Well, chronic stressors. Now, that's a big category. When we think about stressors, the first stuff that pops to mind is like the boss who's a jerk, or the driver that cuts you off or something. And these are real. These are psychosocial stressors. But there's others as well. One of the biggest ones is called historical stress. And this means what happened to us early in life. These have been tracked through a thing called ACE scores, or Adverse Childhood Experience scores. Basically, the more bad stuff that happens early along, the more readily we can get flipped and triggered into that fight or flight mode, and the harder time we have going out of it. Other factors, the total load of mental, emotional stressors. So how bad any one stressor is, how many total stressors there are, how long they've been going on for, these things are all cumulative. And there's some other factors that, not as obvious but just as relevant. One can be an irregular schedule. Now, the adrenals control how our body's daily rhythm works. So if we're sleeping and eating and stuff at different times throughout the day, from day to day, that makes it harder for them, and it worsens that total stress load. Along those same lines, the poorer our blood sugar is regulated, the harder life is for our adrenal glands, and the more likely they are to manifest problems. So I want to briefly kind of make a distinction between what's really happening in the body in these cases and what's popularly called adrenal fatigue. The term I think is the most accessible is adrenal dysfunction. Now, the fatigue word, it implies that they're worn out, that they're tired, that they've worked hard under stress and now they're just worn out and they're sluggish because they're weak, basically. They can't do anymore. And one problem is that in many of these cases, they're overproducing stress hormone. They're not underproducing it. But when they are underproducing it, it's almost always because they're choosing to, not because they can't. It's a really important difference. It might sound subtle, but in cases of adrenal dysfunction, the whole system that includes the adrenals is choosing to slow the body down and choosing to force some time of rest and recovery. There are different situations, which are rare, in which the adrenals are closer to broken. They can't make cortisol, they can't make hormones. And in those cases, it's really all about either giving those hormones from outside the body or trying to make them produce more by themselves. But that's not what's happening with adrenal dysfunction. They're either making too much, they're making it at the wrong time, or they're not making it on purpose. So in these cases, the strategies are completely different. Now, the things that help, things that make a big difference, are basically things that cause there to be less strain on the adrenals, that lets your body rest and lets them recover properly. So the first big thing is thinking about the total stress response. Now, there's some exercises that I'll mention that can help the body modulate it better. But the first question is, how much stuff are you taking on? And how important is all of it? I remember a few years ago, I was pretty sick and I cleared my calendar for about a month. I had a meningitis and, everything went by the wayside. And it's kind of amazing how in those situations, how much you really can clear from your schedule when you need to. Imagine that you had a loved one that was ill and you were going to be by their bedside often for a few weeks. How many things currently that you're doing would you not do? Would you just say, hey, I can't be there? So if you are under chronic long-term stress and it's affecting you, think about yourself the same way. There's a lot of things you're doing that you don't really have to do, that you could let go of, you could delegate out of, you could step away from. So just be aware that that's the first step, is to lower that total load. Now, things that can help and simply decrease the body's total load and help the body go into parasympathetic more often are things like breathing exercises, muscular tension or relaxation exercises. You want some recurrent rituals. You want some ways in which you've got time set aside that you'll take solely for the purpose of helping your body go into that reparative mode. I'll briefly mention one called alternate nostril breathing. There's some different versions of this, but the basic idea is you want to breathe and control which nostril your breath comes out of. Really all it comes down to. A common timing is to inhale on a count of 1, hold the breath on a count of 4, and exhale on a count of 2. So the process can look like this. You would inhale on the right nostril for a 1 count, hold for a 4 count, exhale left nostril 2 count, inhale left nostril 1 count, hold for a 4 count, exhale for a 2 count. So that's the basic practice. A duration of that can be as little as 3 minutes. What happens is that your body has a breathing pattern that shifts between left and right nostril throughout the day, and that correlates with the balance of the autonomic nervous system. So when you make a deliberate rhythm and you control your breathing, you help your body move back to that relaxation state. There's many other examples of things you can do, yoga, various types of meditation, Tai Chi exercises, you name it. But find something and do it regularly. We need that. We just don't get the amount of repair that we require from modern life otherwise. The other big step apart from managing stress is managing glucose. So the more steady your blood sugar is, the less you've got to make stress hormones to chase your blood sugar and try to keep it in line and even keel. So how do you go about doing that? Well, it's interesting. There's an inverse relationship between dietary carbohydrate and cortisol. So healthy carbs allow your body to lower cortisol. You don't need to make cortisol to form glucose out of your muscle tissue when there's some glucose coming from good foods. Now, healthy carbs and unhealthy carbs are worlds apart. It's common still that people think about carbohydrates as inherently bad for the body, but they're not. The difference between a plate of lentils and a slice of Wonder Bread, they're not the same food category, and it's not at all meaningful to think about them in the same way. In fact, a recent study even showed that low carbohydrate diets raise the risk of diabetes when they consist of processed foods. So yeah, it's not about carbs as a category being bad, but good carbs help to regulate cortisol. The main important take-home message here is, especially in the evening, if we have too little carbohydrate in the evening, the body needs to make more cortisol to raise blood sugar and keep it up throughout the night. And that fights against our attempts to sleep. So don't be afraid of good carbs, include them in your diet, especially in the evening. Another consideration that's related is electrolytes. So the adrenals also control the intake of sodium and the excretion of potassium from the body. As such, they govern the electrolyte balance throughout the cells. We want to consume adequate amounts of them. And it's generally easy to get enough sodium. There are some things that talk about increasing more sodium to help the adrenals. Well, that can be true when they're broken, but when they're stressed or dysfunctional, it's not that they can't do things, it's that they're choosing not to. And if you raise your salt intake, your body just gets rid of more salt. You just excrete more salt, and you can get into a vicious cycle of feeling like you need more and more of it. So don't be afraid of salt, but don't feel like it's a magic tonic either. On the other hand, potassium is something that we often get too little of. Our requirements for potassium are between about 3,000 to 7,000 milligrams per day, whereas we do best with only 1,000 or 2,000 milligrams of sodium. And in almost all cases, our diets are the exact opposite. So the more we can flip that, the better things are for the adrenals. Where does potassium come from? Bananas often pop to mind as the super rich source of it. They are, but they're really not that special in the category of vegetables and fruits. Anything you can think of, any fruit and vegetable you can think of, is typically a very rich source of potassium. So potassium is often just a marker of your total intake of produce. You want 5 to 10 good-sized servings throughout the course of the day. Now, the adrenals, they also govern the body's circadian rhythm, the daily cycle. So the more consistent and regular your rhythm is, the less they've got to do to push it back on track. So when you sleep, when you eat, when you go outside, when you exercise, try to ritualize these things. Parents often have an understanding that when there's a baby around, that the quality of your day is a function of how well you follow a baby's schedule. When you screw up the schedule, nobody's happy. And it's not that different for adults. We really do much better when we can stick to a recurrent, regular schedule. Another big thought to think about is inflammation. Now, the adrenals also make hormones that govern the inflammatory response. Glucocorticoids act as anti-inflammatories. So the more we can do with dietary anti-inflammatories, the less we need cortisol for regulating inflammation. So what are the main anti-inflammatory foods in the diet? Well, you can think about this in different ways. One way is things that are colorful, have a lot of pigments in them. So berries pop to mind. Green tea is a great example. The dark leafy greens. Also, we see these pigments in intact whole grains and legumes. So legumes can be among the highest sources of some of these pigments. Think about like black beans or pinto beans or navy beans. These things are excellent sources of them. Intact whole grains, brown rice, buckwheat, rich in pigments, also rich in other compounds that work well for controlling inflammation. And then we think about certain dietary fats. So both omega-3 and omega-6 fats work to help regulate and lower inflammation. Omega-3 fats, we get those from seafood, preferably low iodine types for those prone to thyroid problems. Some great examples there include squid. Also, we see moderate foods such as salmon. Other low iodine options like shrimp can be very good as well. And then also there's plant sources like flax oil, which are very rich in omega-3 fats. Omega-6 fats, they've gotten a bit of a bad rap, and it's not at all deserved. So the densest sources of them include sunflower seeds and walnuts. And this is another essential fat. We need it, our bodies cannot make it. And it's part of arresting the whole inflammatory process. So overall, the more we can take the strain off of the adrenals and the more that we can help regulate the things they have to regulate, the better we can recover and the better we can get past these problematic symptoms. All right, Dr. C with you. Take good care of yourself, and I'll see you again real soon.